Imagine your 84-year-old mother is kidnapped at gunpoint from her own home. Blood on the porch, a masked man on the doorbell camera, ransom notes demanding Bitcoin. Now, imagine the FBI shows up to help, and the local sheriff blocks them from testing the evidence, sends it to a private lab instead, then gets spotted at a basketball game while the search is still active. That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what happened to the family of Nancy Guthrie in Tucson, Arizona. And 2 weeks later, she's still gone. Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today's Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, disappeared from her home in the Catalina foothills just north of Tucson, Arizona, in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026. She is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker, she takes daily heart medication, and as of right now, nobody knows where she is, whether she's alive or who took her. But before we get into the sheriff controversy, you need to understand what actually happened that night, because the details are chilling. Nancy Guthrie is not just Savannah Guthrie's mom. She's an 84-year-old woman who raised 3 kids largely on her own after her husband Charles died at just 49 years old during a mining exploration trip in Mexico back in 1988. Savannah became the co-anchor of the Today Show. Her son, Cameron, became a retired Air Force colonel who flew F-16 fighter jets. Her daughter, Annie, became a poet and jeweler. Nancy raised all 3 of them, and at 84, she was still living independently in the Catalina foothills, still sharp, still active in her church community. Her friends say she was the kind of woman who didn't slow down. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy had dinner and played games at her daughter Annie's house. Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, who teaches AP biology at a local school, drove Nancy home and dropped her off at approximately 9:50 p.m. Her garage door closed just before 10. That was the last time anyone saw her. Sometime between midnight and 1:50 a.m. on February 1st, a figure appeared at Nancy's front door. He was wearing a ski mask and black gloves. He had a holstered handgun visible on his body, and he was carrying a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a backpack sold exclusively at Walmart. The man tried to cover the Nest doorbell camera with leaves before punching it. At 1:47 a.m., the camera disconnected. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker lost its connection to its monitoring phone app, and then nothing. And here's something that tells you a lot about how this investigation went. The sheriff's department initially said the doorbell footage had been overwritten and was unrecoverable, but the FBI went directly to Google, which owns Nest, and managed to pull the footage from their back-end servers. FBI Director Kash Patel personally released the recovered images on February 10th, so the FBI recovered critical evidence that the sheriff's department had already written off. Keep that in mind when Nanos tells you he doesn't need the Bureau's help. The next morning, Nancy missed a scheduled virtual church service. Her church friend called the family. By 11 a.m., relatives arrived at her home. Her phone was still inside. Her wallet was still inside, but Nancy was gone. They searched for about an hour before calling 911 just after noon. When forensic investigators processed the scene, they found Nancy Guthrie's blood on the front porch. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden later said the splatter pattern suggested she had been bleeding from either the hands or the face. Even more critically, investigators recovered DNA from someone who was not Nancy and not anyone known to be in regular contact with her. An unknown person had been on that property. Several black gloves were found during expanded searches. The closest pair was about 2 miles from her home. The farthest was 10 miles away. So at this point, you have a clear crime scene, physical evidence, DNA from a potential suspect, and doorbell footage of the intruder. This is the kind of case where fast forensic work matters more than almost anything. Every hour counts, which is what makes what happened next so infuriating. The man running the investigation is Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. He's a 50-year law enforcement veteran who first joined the department in 1984. He was appointed sheriff in 2015 after the previous sheriff retired, lost the job in the 2016 election, won it back in 2020, and then barely held onto it in 2024, winning re-election by just 481 votes. When this case landed on his desk, the FBI immediately offered to help. And they did. FBI agents physically collected and bagged the glove found near the crime scene under what's called a joint support agreement. The FBI's evidence response team was on the ground in Tucson. But here's where it goes sideways. Instead of sending the evidence to the FBI's National Crime Lab in Quantico, Virginia, which is one of the most advanced forensic facilities on Earth, Sheriff Nanos insisted on routing everything to DNA Labs International, a private forensic lab in Florida that his department has used on a contract basis. Even though the FBI's own team bagged the glove, All items were signed over to the Pima County evidence custodian, who then shipped them to Florida. The department reportedly spent around $200,000 on private lab fees. The FBI was not happy. Sources inside the Bureau told News Nation reporter Brian Enton that the sheriff was withholding basically all the evidence in the case. One federal official called the sheriff's decisions dumb and insane. Another source told Reuters that the fastest path to answers was leveraging federal resources and technology, and that anything less only prolongs the Guthrie family's grief and the community's wait for justice. The FBI warned that once the Florida lab finishes, they would likely have to retest everything anyway, adding even more delays to a case where an 84-year-old woman with a heart condition has been missing in the Arizona desert. Fox News sources described the FBI's access to evidence as minimal. News Nation reported that investigators working the case still didn't know who was actually in charge, whether it was the sheriff or the FBI. And Nanos? He pushed back hard. He called the blocking allegations not even close to the truth, completely false, and the furthest from the truth. His argument was that his lab already had all the reference markers for the family and people of interest. The landscaper, the pool guy, everyone who might have left innocent DNA at the property. He said splitting evidence between two labs adds a step that's not needed and could create conflicts. Now, that's a reasonable sounding argument on paper, but the reason people aren't buying it is because of everything else Chris Nanos did during the investigation. And honestly, even the lab argument falls apart under scrutiny. The FBI's crime lab in Quantico is one of the most advanced forensic facilities in the world. They process DNA for cases across the country. They have technology and databases that a private Florida lab simply does not have access to. And the FBI already had the evidence in their hands. Their own team bagged the glove. Routing it away from them and to a private contractor wasn't just a logistical choice, it was a jurisdictional power move. And in a case where every hour matters for an 84-year-old woman with a heart condition, that kind of power move could cost a life. If you're finding this helpful, hit subscribe. I cover breaking cases and investigations every week. Now let's talk about the 3 decisions that destroyed public confidence in this sheriff. The first big one is the crime scene itself. Nanos admitted to the Arizona Republic that his department released Nancy's home back to the family too early. Before they were done processing it, they had to come back days later to collect additional evidence. In the meantime, journalists walked right up to the front door and photographed blood droplets that were still visible on the porch. When a reporter asked at a press conference whether the evidence could have been contaminated, Nanos shrugged and said, "I'll let the court worry about it." A retired Mesa police officer called the premature scene release one of the 2 biggest errors in the case. The second one is almost unbelievable. While Nancy Guthrie was still missing, while her family was releasing desperate video pleas, begging the kidnapper to return their mother, Sheriff Chris Nanos was spotted at a University of Arizona basketball game. Pima County Supervisor Dr. Matt Hines didn't hold back. He said, "That does not look good. I mean, dude, watch the game at home. Read the room." Nanos responded that he can't work around the clock and that he'd have to live with the bad optics. The third one involves the department's search aircraft. Fox News Digital learned that the pilot of the sheriff's high-tech search plane was demoted to street patrol after a personal conflict with Nanos. That took a critical aerial search capability offline during the most urgent phase of the entire investigation. A union official said the pilot personally pleaded with Nanos to reconsider but was ignored. The union described the department's search and rescue unit as dangerously short-staffed during one of the highest-profile searches in department history, and this is where it gets even worse. Because Chris Nanos didn't suddenly become controversial when Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The man has a history. Back in 2015, during his first tenure as sheriff, the FBI investigated his own department for misuse of civil asset forfeiture funds. The investigation found that department members had conspired to circumvent the restrictions on the use of forfeiture money. His former chief deputy, Chris Radke, was indicted on 7 federal felony charges, including conspiracy to commit money laundering. Radke allegedly used around $500,000 in forfeited assets for personal schemes, including purchasing a $20,000 commercial kitchen so his niece could open a cafe inside department headquarters, rent-free. Nanos himself requested nearly $220,000 in transfers to the fund at the center of the probe, though he was never personally charged. In 2023, the Arizona Attorney General opened a criminal investigation into Nanos over the alleged sexual assault of a female deputy by one of his sergeants. The complaint stated that department leaders were aware the assault was happening and refused to intervene for 80 minutes. The deputy sued Pima County and Nanos for $900,000. $100,000. And during the 2024 election, Nanos placed his Republican challenger, Lieutenant Heather Lappin, and a union critic named Sergeant Aaron Cross on administrative leave. Both filed federal lawsuits alleging retaliation and First Amendment violations. Lappin pointed out that she had been referred to Internal Affairs 5 times since declaring her candidacy, compared to just once in her entire previous 18 years of service. So when FBI sources go on the record calling this sheriff's evidence decisions insane, the community isn't exactly giving him the benefit of the doubt. Now, there's another layer to this story that makes it even more disturbing: the ransom demands. Shortly after Nancy disappeared, multiple ransom notes started arriving at local Tucson TV stations and at TMZ. They demanded payment in Bitcoin. One note delivered to KGUN demanded $6 million with a deadline of 5 p.m. on February 9th. The notes included specific details about what Nancy was wearing when she was taken. TMZ founder Harvey Levin received 3 separate emails from someone claiming to know the kidnapper's identity, eventually demanding $100,000 in Bitcoin. The deadlines passed. No proof of life was ever provided. The Guthrie siblings, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron, released heartbreaking video pleas. In one message from February 7th, they addressed the captor directly, saying, "We received your message and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." At least one of the ransom schemes was confirmed to be a fraud. A man named Derek Colella, 42, from Hawthorne, California, was arrested for sending fake ransom texts to Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso just moments after the family's first public video plea. Investigators traced an internet phone line to a Gmail account registered to Colella. He was released on $20,000 bond with electronic monitoring. Imagine being the family. Your elderly mother is missing. You're begging her kidnapper to take your money and give her back. And some guy in California is sending fake ransom texts trying to scam you. The cruelty is hard to wrap your head around. The federal response to this case has been unlike anything we've seen in years. FBI Director Kash Patel personally flew to Tucson. The Bureau deployed its cellular analysis survey team and posted Nancy on the most wanted missing persons list. The reward was pushed up to $100,000. Over 18,000 tips poured in. Digital billboards went up across multiple states. President Trump himself called Savannah Guthrie to offer federal resources. On February 13th, a SWAT team executed a federal search warrant at a home about 2 miles from Nancy's residence near East Orange Grove Road and North First Avenue. 3 people were detained, 2 at the house, described as possibly a mother and son, and 1 during a traffic stop nearby. A gray Range Rover was tagged and towed from a Culver's restaurant parking lot. Helicopters circled overhead. News cameras caught it all live. For a few hours, it felt like the break the case needed, but hours later, all 3 were released. No arrests were made. The sheriff confirmed nobody remained in custody. It wasn't the only false alarm either. Days earlier, a man was detained in Rio Rico, Arizona, after another SWAT operation. He told reporters that agents said he resembled the man in the doorbell footage. He was also released after hours of questioning. 2 weeks in, multiple SWAT raids, 0 arrests, and the evidence is sitting in a private lab in Florida. The Tucson community has been shaken to its core. Yellow flowers and ribbons now blanket Nancy's property. Neighbors have left candles and mahjong tiles at her mailbox because Nancy loved playing mahjong. A couple named Michelle and Mike drove 2 hours from Phoenix just to leave flowers on Valentine's Day. Nancy's longtime friend, Jacqueline Sharkey, a journalism professor at the University of Arizona, said her disappearance left a tremendous tear in the fabric of the community. Meanwhile, the true crime media ecosystem descended on the city. Podcasters, YouTubers, and TikTok creators set up camp outside Nancy's home. One controversial streamer ordered pizza delivered to the crime scene during a live broadcast. Investigators have said some of the aggressive, rumor-driven coverage has been actively unhelpful. The most explosive media moment came from former CNN anchor Ashley Banfield, who reported on her podcast that Nancy's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, may be the prime suspect, citing a trusted law enforcement source. The sheriff's department called it irresponsible. Banfield doubled down, noting that Annie's car had been towed into evidence. But 2 law enforcement sources later told NBC that investigators were actually leaning away from family members as suspects. The Guthrie family is reportedly exploring legal action against Banfield, so on top of everything else, the family has to deal with public accusations against one of their own while their mother is still missing. So where does this all stand right now? Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 2 weeks. She's 84 years old with a heart condition and no medication. No suspects have been named. No arrests have been made. The FBI and the Sheriff's Department appear to still be at odds over the handling of evidence. Sheriff Nanos said in a press conference that there has been no sign of life, but he also said there has been no sign of death. And here's the thing that haunts me about this case. Abductions of women over 80 are almost unheard of. Ransom kidnappings in America are vanishingly rare. Every single element of this case is bizarre. The masked intruder with a Walmart backpack, the Bitcoin ransom notes, the FBI director flying in, personally, and a local sheriff with a trail of federal investigations, retaliation lawsuits, and exactly 481 votes standing between him and losing his job, refusing to let the Bureau test the evidence that might actually bring Nancy home. Whether Nanos made a defensible jurisdictional call or whether his ego cost an 84-year-old woman her best chance of being found alive, that's the question that will define this case. Nancy's family is still waiting. Tucson is still watching. And the clock is still running. If you want to stay updated on this case, hit subscribe. I'll be covering every major development as it breaks. And if you have any information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the FBI tip line number is 1-800-CALL-FBI.